It makes me wonder how the same place families visit every weekend can be where some of the worst days of people's lives happen. Welcome back. I'm really glad you're here. This is Patrick again. From a woman who trusted the equipment while inside a shark tank, to a man on an open-air safari tram who had been told to stay seated and never considered what was overhead. It was September 3rd, 2015. A large aquarium on the Gulf Coast of Texas, mid-morning, clear and humid. The facility ran a paid Shark Tank dive program on weekends. Certified divers only, maximum 4 participants per session, full rental equipment provided. The main tank was roughly 30 feet at its deepest point, housing sand tiger sharks, nurse sharks, and large reef fish. Rhea Dreska was 27, a paralegal from Houston, certified open water diver for 3 years. About a dozen logged dives total, mostly recreational reef dives in the Gulf with friends. She'd been underwater enough times to feel comfortable, which is exactly the kind of confidence that stops you from asking questions you probably should. She'd booked the Shark Tank experience 2 months out, showed up on time, filled out the waiver, listed her certification. Nothing flagged. The facility provided all equipment, regulators, BCDs, tanks. Before every session, a staff member ran a basic pre-dive check on each unit, which sounds thorough until you find out that the regulator assigned to Rhea had a service gap of just over 14 months. Recommended interval was 12. That gap was in the equipment log, but hadn't been flagged because the facility's maintenance system ran on manual review rather than automated alerts, and this unit had been missed in the last quarterly check. It had gone through at least 6 dives since its last service date without any reported issues, which is probably exactly why nobody caught it. Here's what a regulator free flow actually means. Instead of delivering air on demand when you inhale, the regulator dumps air continuously and uncontrollably. It's loud, disorienting, and burns through a tank fast. Every open water certification course covers what to do when it happens. Keep the regulator in your mouth, signal your instructor, and begin a slow, controlled ascent. Rhea had been through that training. She knew the protocol. The pre-dive briefing covered descent rate, hand signals, the designated swim zone, and emergency procedures. The instructor led the group of 3 into the water from a submerged entry platform at the side of the tank. Descent was normal. Rhea reached approximately 22 feet without any issues. Then the regulator started free-flowing. She panicked. She pulled the regulator out of her mouth, the opposite of what she'd been trained to do, and kicked hard for the surface. She covered 22 feet in an estimated 8 to 10 seconds, roughly 4 times faster than the recommended ascent rate of 1 foot per second. At that speed, nitrogen dissolved in the blood doesn't have time to off-gas through normal respiration. Instead, it comes out of solution in the bloodstream as bubbles, arterial gas embolism, which can block circulation to the brain and heart. It can happen on ascents from depths as shallow as 10 feet if the rate is fast enough. At 22 feet with a full panic ascent, the outcome was almost predictable. She broke the surface, reached the tank edge, and lost consciousness within seconds. A staff member on the observation platform saw her go limp and called for emergency response immediately. 2 staff members pulled her from the water within about 2 minutes. No pulse. The instructor surfaced shortly after and assisted with resuscitation, while emergency personnel were en route, approximately 9 minutes after the call. Resuscitation continued poolside for over 20 minutes before she was transported to a nearby medical facility. Rhea Dreska was pronounced dead 4 hours after the incident. Cause of death was arterial gas embolism, gas bubbles confirmed in both cerebral and coronary circulation at autopsy, consistent with a rapid, uncontrolled ascent. No pre-existing cardiovascular condition was identified. The regulator was recovered and examined independently. Internal wear consistent with overdue maintenance was confirmed as the likely cause of the free-flow failure. The dive program was suspended pending a full equipment audit, during which 2 additional regulators were found outside their service intervals. The facility was cited for multiple equipment maintenance violations. Criminal negligence was reviewed but not charged, the findings pointing to systemic oversight failure rather than deliberate misconduct. Civil proceedings were settled out of court. And if you think a faulty regulator is a rough way to go, Wait until you hear what happens when someone decides a gorilla enclosure glass is something worth slapping repeatedly. It was March 14th, 2016. A mid-sized zoo in northern Ohio, Sunday morning, gray sky, packed crowd. The gorilla viewing hall was one of the main draws, a long corridor of floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass panels looking into a habitat roughly 40 feet wide and 25 feet deep. Jesper Munn was 34, ran HVAC service calls out of a small company outside Cleveland. On his feet all day, dealing with people, the kind of guy who fills a room without trying. He'd come out that Sunday with his girlfriend and her 2 younger siblings. No real plan, just something to do. He'd had a few drinks before they arrived, not falling over, but at 0.09 his judgment was softer than he probably realized. Louder than usual, less likely to pump the brakes on anything. The silverback in this enclosure was 27 years old, somewhere between 380 and 400 pounds. Western lowland gorillas aren't aggressive by default, but they're territorial, and they respond to specific things. Sustained eye contact, loud noise aimed at them, repeated impact on their enclosure. When one decides something is a threat, it doesn't ease into it. There's a display, and then there's a charge, and the window between those two things is a lot shorter than most people expect. The glass panels in a gorilla exhibit are built to absorb impact, but the frame seals holding them in place have limits. Not a design flaw, just physics. Jesper's group reached the gorilla hall around 10:40. The silverback was near the center of the habitat, seated, facing the glass. Jesper knocked on the glass once and the animal looked up, which was apparently all the encouragement he needed. He knocked again harder. His girlfriend grabbed his arm, and he shrugged her off without even looking at her. There were 2 warning signs within 2 feet of where he was standing. One mounted on the wall, one affixed directly to the glass panel. Both said the same thing: do not tap, knock, or strike the glass. Do not make sustained eye contact. Do not make loud noises directed at the animals. He was looking right at them. A keeper working the hall walked over and told him to stop. He nodded, seemed fine. She watched him for about 30 seconds and moved on. The moment she turned the corner, he started again, except this time it wasn't knocking. Open palm, flat and hard, slapping directly on the glass. Other visitors around him started backing up. The silverback stayed on all fours, but his posture shifted, shoulders up, head low, and he started a low hooting that built in pace, slow at first, then faster. A second keeper near the exit, roughly 35 feet away, saw the body language shift and started moving toward Jesper, calling out to him to step back. He slapped the glass twice more and let out a loud shout directly at the animal. Not words, just noise. The silverback charged. That distance, center of the habitat to the glass, gone in under 2 seconds. The first impact displaced the panel. The lower left corner separated from the frame seal. The bottom pushed outward about 14 inches. Then a vertical crack ran up through it. A second impact within roughly 1 second finished it. The lower half gave way. Jesper was standing about 18 inches from the glass. The displacement caught him across the lower chest and threw him backward about 6 feet onto the corridor floor. The opening was roughly 4 feet high, enough for the silverback to push partially through and reach him where he landed. What followed lasted less than 30 seconds. Multiple strikes to the upper torso and head, open-handed, and at least one closed fist. One blow to the left side of his skull, another across his chest. He didn't get up after the second hit. Staff used compressed air horns to drive the silverback back into the habitat within about 90 seconds. Paramedics arrived roughly 11 minutes after the call. Jesper was still alive. He lost consciousness in the ambulance and never came back. He was pronounced dead about 2 hours later. Fractured sternum, 4 broken ribs on the left side, collapsed left lung, traumatic brain injury from the impact to his left temple, internal bleeding in the chest cavity. The medical examiner noted any one of those was individually survivable with fast intervention. Together they weren't. Security footage from 3 cameras caught everything. Toxicology came back at 0.09. The investigation found the frame seal system had been flagged in an internal inspection 2 years prior and never upgraded. The zoo was cited for deferred maintenance. No criminal charges were filed. ruled an accident with contributing negligence on both sides. The silverback was not euthanized. Jesper's girlfriend told investigators she'd asked him to stop 3 times before the keeper ever got involved. That part didn't make it into the official summary. It was in the raw interview transcript. What gets me about the next one is how calculated it was. He didn't just miss a warning. He waited for the keeper to walk away before he made his move. It was August 7th, 2015. A large regional zoo in the mid-Atlantic, mid-afternoon. The kind of humid summer day where the air barely moves and everything smells like hay and standing water. Along the perimeter were service gates, heavy steel frames with sliding bolt latches used by keepers for feeding runs and routine maintenance. Hayden Mabley was 41, a contractor from Central Virginia, in town for a work project with a few days to spare. Physically fit, outdoorsy, the kind of guy who'd spent enough time working in the field to feel comfortable in spaces that made other people nervous. He hunted, he hiked, he didn't think much of fences. He'd been photographing animals throughout the zoo on a DSLR, and by the time he reached the rhino yard, he'd already spent nearly 20 minutes at the enclosure working angles, trying to get the resident female to move closer to the fence line. White rhinos are the second largest land animal after elephants, regularly reaching between 3,500 and 4,000 pounds. They can look slow and indifferent from a distance, and in captivity, that impression gets reinforced. They're often just standing there, barely moving, seemingly unbothered by anything. That's exactly what makes them dangerous to underestimate. Their eyesight is poor. They're acutely sensitive to unfamiliar movement and scent at close range, and when one is startled or threatened, it doesn't retreat. A full-speed charge covers ground at around 30 miles per hour, and at that weight, the impact isn't something a human body handles in an open field. There were 3 service gates along the eastern fence line, and one had been left unlatched after a morning feeding run. Bolt not fully seated, not open but not secured either. A sign posted directly on it read, "Authorized personnel only, do not open." A second sign on the adjacent fence panel, "Do not approach fence, do not attempt to enter enclosure." A keeper doing a routine perimeter check noticed Hayden standing close to the gate and walked over, told him to step back behind the rope barrier. He complied, made small talk for a minute, asked about the rhino. The keeper answered briefly, reminded him to stay behind the rope line, and moved on. She'd been gone less than 4 minutes when he pushed the gate open and walked in. He didn't rush. Camera raised, moving toward the rhino who was standing about 60 feet away near a water trough. He'd covered maybe 25 feet when she registered him, turned, lifted her head, and went completely still for about 4 seconds. That stillness isn't calm. That's threat assessment. Then she charged. 30 miles per hour across 35 feet. Contact in just over 1 second. The horn caught his left hip and lower abdomen as he tried to turn away, and the impact lifted him off the ground. He landed about 12 feet from the point of contact. She turned, found him, and came through again. Horn to the lower back, full body weight following through, front feet coming down across his torso as she moved over him. He was conscious after the first impact. He wasn't after the second. The keeper heard the noise from the far end of the perimeter and radioed immediately, but protocol required her to wait for backup before entering. The rhino stayed near Hayden's body for about 22 minutes before keepers moved her into an adjacent holding pen using a feed distraction. Emergency personnel entered roughly 26 minutes after the initial impact. No pulse. Hayden Mabley was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries with massive internal hemorrhage, ruptured spleen, lacerated liver, fractures to the left pelvis, 3 lumbar vertebrae, and 5 ribs on the right side. The horn impact had perforated the abdominal wall. The trampling injuries were identified as the primary cause of death. The compression across his chest sufficient to cause bilateral lung contusion and cardiac tamponade. The unlatched gate was flagged as a contributing factor, but the investigation was clear. It didn't cause this. Hayden had been warned, had complied, and then walked in the moment the keeper was out of sight. Ruled an accident. No charges filed. His camera was recovered about 8 feet from where he fell. The last image on the card was a wide shot of the rhino at the water trough, time-stamped 4 seconds before the charge. Okay, now I think this next one is the hardest case in this episode to sit with, because unlike everyone else today, Alan Briggs didn't ignore anything. He just ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was November 8th, 2015, a large aquarium on the eastern seaboard. Early evening, the tail end of a busy Saturday. The facility was running a scheduled fire alarm evacuation drill, announced to staff, but not to visitors. Standard practice to simulate real conditions. Visitors were directed toward marked exit corridors by staff positioned throughout the building. The main floor cleared quickly. The upper level took longer. Alan Briggs was 38, an electrician from Baltimore. He'd come to the aquarium alone, midway through a solo weekend in the city. Methodical guy, the kind of person who read every exhibit placard and took his time. He'd been on the upper level when the alarm triggered, photographing one of the large tank displays. When the evacuation flow started, he moved with the crowd toward the nearest marked exit corridor, a wide hallway feeding toward the building's north stairwell. Somewhere in that corridor, the crowd split. A secondary flow of visitors turned left toward a second stairwell. Alan followed the smaller group, which thinned out fast. Within about 2 minutes, he was alone in a narrower hallway he didn't recognize. The alarm was still going. He kept moving forward, looking for an exit sign. The door at the end of that hallway was a push-bar emergency exit. Locks from the outside, opens freely from the interior during a fire alarm, as required by building code. It looked identical to every other exit door in the building. Alan pushed through it. It didn't lead outside. It opened into a staff-only equipment corridor running along the back of the aquarium's filtration and life support systems. Narrow, poorly lit, not designed for public access. What Alan had no way of knowing was that a CO2 leak had been developing in that corridor for several hours. A slow failure in one of the pressurized lines used to regulate pH levels in the large marine tanks. CO2 is odorless, colorless, and heavier than air, which means it pools at floor level and builds up in enclosed spaces with no warning at all. The concentration in that corridor had been climbing since mid-afternoon. At concentrations above 10%, CO2 doesn't just displace oxygen, it acts directly on the respiratory system, causing dizziness, disorientation, and loss of consciousness within seconds. The corridor had no CO2 monitoring alarm, no warning signage on the door. The leak hadn't been detected because the equipment room's internal sensor had malfunctioned 3 weeks earlier and hadn't been replaced yet. Alan made it about 15 feet inside before he went down. CO2 poisoning at that concentration doesn't give you time to understand what's happening. You're disoriented, then you're on the floor. He was there for approximately 40 minutes before anyone realized he was missing. A loose acquaintance he'd met at his hotel that morning mentioned to a staff member during re-entry that he hadn't come back out with the crowd. A staff member doing a post-evacuation sweep found the push-bar door ajar and radioed for a maintenance team rather than entering. The right call. The maintenance team arrived with CO2 detection equipment about 12 minutes later, confirmed elevated levels, ventilated the corridor, and found Alan approximately 15 feet inside the door. No pulse. Resuscitation was attempted on site for approximately 18 minutes before he was transported to a nearby medical facility. He was pronounced dead on arrival. Alan Briggs was pronounced dead approximately 2 hours after he was found. Cause of death was hypercapnic asphyxiation, CO2 poisoning at a concentration sufficient to cause rapid loss of consciousness and fatal respiratory depression. The autopsy confirmed no pre-existing condition. Time of death was estimated at within 5 minutes of entering the corridor. The investigation identified 3 institutional failures: a CO2 sensor that had been malfunctioning for 3 weeks without replacement, no warning signage on the corridor door, and the push-bar door's accessibility from the public hallway during an evacuation. The corroded fitting on the CO2 line had not been caught in the last scheduled maintenance inspection. The facility was cited for multiple safety violations. No criminal charges were filed. Civil proceedings were initiated by Alan's family and settled out of court. From a case where I genuinely feel for the victim to one where I find myself asking the same question every time. Why did she get back up on that railing after being told twice to get down? It was July 22nd, 2013. A zoo in southern Florida, mid-afternoon, 94 degrees Fahrenheit, and humid enough that the air felt thick just standing still. The saltwater crocodile exhibit was an outdoor enclosure, a large open-air lagoon roughly 80 feet long and 40 feet wide, bordered on the visitor side by an elevated wooden boardwalk sitting about 9 feet above the water. Jolene Velenthan was 29, originally from the Dallas area, in Florida on a solo trip. She'd quit her job a few months earlier and was traveling, which meant she had her phone out constantly, photographing everything. She had a good eye for composition and had been leaning over railings and climbing on benches throughout the zoo all day to get better angles. Not reckless in an obvious way. She wasn't drunk or showing off for anyone. She just had a very high tolerance for physical risk when a good shot was involved. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth. The two residents here were both adult males, one at approximately 14 feet and around 1,100 pounds, the other at 12 feet and roughly 880 pounds. Ambush predators, capable of staying almost completely motionless at or just below the water surface for long stretches. And here's the thing about saltwater crocodiles near a water boundary. You usually don't see them move until they already have you. The death roll alone can dislocate joints and tear limbs in seconds. Posted at the boardwalk entrance and at 2 points along the railing were signs. Do not climb or sit on railing. Do not lean over railing. Do not throw objects into enclosure. Jolene had walked past all 3 of them. She'd been on the boardwalk about 10 minutes when she climbed up and sat on the upper railing, legs dangling over the enclosure side, phone out, leaning forward to get a downward angle on the water. A staff member saw her and told her to get down. She got down. Within 2 minutes, she was back up. The same staff member, still within sight at the far end of the boardwalk, called out to her again, louder this time. She shifted her weight forward to get the angle she wanted and went over head first. The fall was about 9 feet. She surfaced within a few seconds, disoriented but conscious, people on the boardwalk already screaming. The larger crocodile had been motionless near the far bank. It didn't move the instant she hit the water. There was a pause of maybe 2 or 3 seconds, the kind that makes witnesses think nothing is going to happen. Then it slipped below the surface and was gone. No splash, no warning. It covered roughly 35 feet before Jolene had fully oriented herself. The initial bite was to her left shoulder and upper arm. The crocodile immediately went into a death roll, violent enough that the churning was visible from the boardwalk above. The rotation dislocated her left shoulder and caused a traumatic degloving injury to the upper arm. She was pulled under, surfaced once about 15 feet from her entry point, and didn't come back up. Emergency response reached the enclosure within about 6 minutes of the radio call. Keepers used noise deterrents and a physical barrier system to push both crocodiles to the far end of the lagoon. Jolene was found on the bottom in about 5 feet of water near the center of the enclosure and recovered approximately 22 minutes after she went in. Jolene Velenthan was pronounced dead at the scene. Cause of death was drowning. The shoulder and arm injuries were severe: dislocated shoulder, significant soft tissue loss to the upper arm, partial degloving of the forearm, but they weren't what killed her. They put her underwater and kept her there. She'd been submerged an estimated 15 to 18 minutes by the time she was recovered, with blunt force trauma to the head from the entry impact, documented as a contributing factor. Both staff warnings were confirmed by witness statements and partial boardwalk camera footage. Railing height was found compliant with applicable standards. Ruled an accident, no charges filed. Her phone was recovered from the lagoon floor during the recovery operation. The last case today is at an open-air safari park in Central Florida, and I still can't get past how close Joel Castron was to just sitting back down and going home that day. It was April 12, 2013. A large open-air safari park in Central Florida, mid-afternoon, flat and bright and hot. The park's main visitor experience was a guided tram tour, a 2-mile loop through open habitats, housing giraffes, zebras, ostriches, and several species of African antelope. 6-car open bench configuration, no roof, no side panels, operator at the front of the lead car facing forward. Joel Castron was 45, owned an auto body shop outside Orlando. He'd come out alone on a day off, not a wildlife enthusiast, just looking for something different to do. He'd brought a handheld video camera and had been filming throughout the tour, relaxed, talkative with the people around him, the kind of guy who treated every outing like it was going to make a good story later. The tram departed at 2:15 p.m., with 23 visitors across the 6 cars. Joel was in the last car, second bench from the rear, right side. 2 other visitors were in that car with him, a couple seated at the front bench, facing forward. The operator was at the front of the lead car, roughly 60 feet ahead, with no direct sightline to the rear. Posted at the boarding platform were 2 signs: remain seated at all times, do not stand, lean over the sides, or extend limbs outside the vehicle. The operator made a verbal announcement over the tram's speaker system, covering the same rules before departure. Joel was filming when it played. The first mile ran through open flat terrain. The second curved into a more densely vegetated section. Tall grass, low trees on both sides, the canopy narrowing overhead. This section passed under 2 wooden service bridges built for keeper vehicles. Clearance heights were marked at the boarding platform, and the tram's audio system announced the first crossing about 30 seconds before reaching it. Somewhere in that tree line, Joel stood up. The couple in the front of his car told investigators he'd been standing intermittently since the tram entered the vegetated section, sitting back down and standing again to get better filming angles over the roof. They told him to sit down at least once. He laughed it off. The first service bridge had a clearance of approximately 11 feet above the track. A seated passenger cleared it with several feet to spare. Joel was 6 feet 1 inch tall. Standing, he did not. The bridge caught him across the back of the neck and upper shoulders at tram speed, approximately 8 miles per hour. The strike drove him downward and forward off the bench, landing him partially in the aisle and partially against the rear safety bar. The couple heard the impact and turned around immediately. Joel was on the floor, not moving. The operator didn't feel anything from the front of the lead car. It took about 40 seconds for the message to reach him, through other passengers relaying it car to car. The tram stopped. Emergency response was called by radio, and personnel reached Joel approximately 14 minutes after the call. Access required a keeper vehicle to navigate from the nearest service entrance mid-loop. He was unresponsive, but had a weak pulse. Transported by ground to a nearby medical facility, then transferred by air to a trauma center about 2 hours later when the full extent of his injuries became clear. Joel Castron died 3 days after the incident without regaining consciousness. The impact caused a hyperflexion injury at the C3 to C4 level. His head snapped violently forward on contact, resulting in a fracture dislocation and complete spinal cord injury above the level required for independent breathing. He was on mechanical ventilation from arrival and developed neurogenic pulmonary edema within the first 48 hours, which progressed to respiratory failure on the 3rd day. The bridge clearance was confirmed as marked at the boarding platform and announced over the tram audio before the crossing. The couple's statements confirmed Joel had been standing intermittently and told to sit down. The operator's forward-facing position and distance to the rear car were flagged as factors limiting real-time supervision. The park was cited for inadequate passenger supervision protocols on multi-car tram configurations. No criminal charges were filed. The tram program was modified to include a rear-facing staff monitor on all tours.